Will the Senator yield for a question?
I would.
First of all, I thank him for the resolution. On behalf of myself and others, I appreciate your representation of the people of Texas who are experiencing literally a crisis on the southern border of our state, of your state, as well as mine. I note the presence of the Senator from Illinois, no greater advocate for the dreamers, the children who were brought here not willfully, and I believe that in our immigration reform bill, we addressed that issue in a humane and compassionate fashion. But I ask my colleague now, isn't it terribly inhumane to see these children taken from these countries by some of the most unspeakable people on earth, these coyotes, and their trip along the way, these hundreds of miles, is so cruel and inhumane to many of these children that it's chilling. That these coyotes are terrible people. They commit crimes to these people, on these young children. They do terrible things. They sometimes ride on the top of a train where their safety is obviously, their lives are literally in jeopardy. And so we talk about, and again, I appreciate the work that's been done on behalf of the Dreamers, but shouldn't we care a great deal about these children, even if they're not in the United States, for what they're undergoing now? And isn't it a humanitarian issue of the highest order? And wouldn't we be better served if we told these children and the people who are motivating them and making a lot of money bringing them here, wouldn't it be better for us to say, look, anybody who shows up at our border is not going to be allowed to stay in this country. But if you go to our consulate, if you go to our embassy in the country in which you reside and make a case that your life is being threatened, you're being persecuted, whatever the conditions are for asylum in our country, then those cases can be judged and we can bring them, if it is a humanitarian case that warrants it, bring them into the United States of America. But say, if you come to our border, you cross those how many miles is it from the Guatemalan border to?
1,200 miles from Guatemala City to McAllen, Texas.
How long?
1,200 miles.
1,200 miles. If you're don't subject yourself to a 1,200-mile trip, which is hazardous to your life and can be, terrible things can happen to you. Why don't we send the message that if you think that you deserve asylum, then you go to the consulate, you go to the embassy, and we will have sufficient personnel there to take up your case, and if your case is compelling and meets our standards for asylum, then we're going to give it to you. But whatever you do, don't risk your life and your well-being to travel 1,200 miles in the hands of a coyote. This is what is, you know, I'd say the Senator from Texas, sometimes when we say we have to have a secure border and the things that we need to do, so we are viewed sometimes as inhumane. What is more, my question is what is more inhumane than what's happening to these children now? Some of them 4, 5, 6 years old. What is more inhumane than what is happening to them as we speak? And shouldn't the President of the United States do as the Secretary of Homeland Security did yesterday and said, you cannot enter our country even if you show up, or you cannot stay in our country. You cannot stay in our country if you show up on the border. But you can apply for humanitarian asylum in the United States of America.
Madam President, I appreciate the question, and I would say there's nobody in this chamber who's been more involved on trying to fix our broken immigration laws than the senior senator from Arizona, and certainly the senior senator from Illinois has been very much involved. Both of them are members of the so-called Gang of Eight, who were the primary authors of the Senate-passed immigration bill. But I would point out that not even under that bill would these children be covered? Because they wouldn't qualify for the so-called DREAM Act provisions authored by the senior senator from Illinois. And that's the point that the Secretary of Homeland Security has been trying to make, is that this is not a green light to anybody and everybody who wants to come to the United States. For their protection, for the protection and safety and security of the American people, and in the interest of an orderly immigration flow and the rule of law, we need people to play by the rules. And as to the, and it's the perception that there are no rules, and that if you make it here, you'll be able to stay regardless of whether you qualify under a law that's created this flood of humanity. And the second thing I would say, the senator is exactly right. I think people underestimate the horror inflicted on migrants who are transported from Central America through Mexico up into the United States at the hands of transnational criminal organizations. The coyotes, as we've always called them, or the human smugglers, they now have to pay the cartels for protection, or they can't travel through these corridors up through Mexico into the United States. And these migrants, in the process of being transported here, riding on the train you alluded to called the Beast, they're prone to accidents. They'll lose their life, leg, or limb. They'll be kidnapped, held for ransom. Women will be raped and assaulted. I mean, it's horrific. Who in their right mind would subject their family to those sort of horrors only to end up here in the United States when our laws do not permit their entry into this country? So somehow the president, I think, is the only one who has the bully pulpit who can send that message in a way that none of us can, so or the Secretary of Homeland Security, to convince them that we're going to enforce our law.
So isn't the only way really we're going to stop this right now is to convince these people not to listen to the coyotes that are advertising on radio and television in these countries, but to convince these people that that trip will not lead to the result of being able to stay in the United States of America. Until that happens, then they're going to believe that if they can get here, they can stay here. And look, all of our hearts and sympathies go out to people that live in these countries in terrible conditions. We understand why they want to come to the United States of America, but they're on a fool's errand. They're on a fool's errand. And meanwhile, they're putting their very lives at risk by taking that arduous journey to Texas from Guatemala or El Salvador or Honduras. I see that also, by the way, my friend, as I say, no greater advocate have I ever known for the Dreamers than Senator Durbin. He was one of the earliest and most outspoken. And I hope he will join us in recognizing that the only way we're going to stop this is to make sure people know that there's no pot of gold at the end of this terrible trip that they're on.
Well, I would say to the senior senator from Arizona, and I know the senator from Illinois is here, and I'll be glad to turn the floor over to him momentarily, but I see two big problems. One is that this wave of children are coming and not allowed to legally enter or stay in the United States, and thus are subject to being returned to their country of origin. That's what Vice President Biden said. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that's the law of the land. But think about what if the president doesn't step up and use his bully pulpit to send this message in a way none of us can, because people pay attention to him and not as much to us. I think that's a fair statement. Then this wave is going to continue, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. But here's the other part of it, I would say, to the senior senator from Arizona and the senior senator from Illinois, both of whom I know passionately care about fixing our broken immigration laws. We've had our differences, but I know you're committed sincerely to trying to fix our broken immigration laws. It is, well, how will the American people let us do this if they've lost confidence in the executive branch's willingness to enforce the current law? I think it makes it much, much, much harder. And in fact, as I alluded a moment ago, you know, the majority leader and the senior senator from New York have both said, well, let's pass immigration reform, but let's just delay its implementation until after President Obama leaves office. That ought to be an embarrassing proposal. I will yield in just a moment, but I would say that That's got to be embarrassing. Why? That shows a lack of confidence in the president's commitment to enforce the rule of law. And I just think it's a problem. So I think the president can help mitigate that problem and help restore the impression that you're not going to get a free pass if you make it to our southern border. I will gladly turn the floor over to the...
I would like to, through the chair, to ask the senator from Texas a question. He has said repeatedly that the president is not enforcing the existing law.
I would be glad to answer the question.
This humanitarian crisis on our border, we all acknowledge, and I think we agree more than we disagree. But I do want to question your premise. Would the senator from Texas tell me which existing law the president is not enforcing that has created this crisis?
Well, I've tried to make, I'd say to my friend from Illinois, I've tried to make clear that the current law bars the entry of these children and people across the border because they wouldn't even meet the terms of the president's executive order if you believe the president's executive order has the effect of law. I don't. But what I'm saying is it's the impression, it's a couple of things. It's both the impression that the president is not committed to enforcing the law and the fact that now when these adults are detained and children are placed with relatives in the country, there are virtually none of them show back up for their hearing. And so the effect is, because we don't have a comprehensive system to enforce our immigration laws even after people come to our country, it's the perception and the reality of how that works that tells them if they make it here, then they won't ever have to leave.
Would the senator